Welcome to Caribbean Focus. I am your host, Hermina Marcellin, and I would like to welcome virtually Ivie Bien Aime. Please, could you help me again with
Yeah,
this beautiful pronunciation?
yes, my name is pronounced Ivie Bien Aime.
Ivie Bien Aime. Thank you very much for joining us on Caribbean Focus.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are most welcome. Caribbean Focus is the community voice of the Caribbean Research Center at Medgar Evers College, the weekly radio program highlighting Caribbean educational and social affairs aired on WNYE 91.5 FM. I am your host, Hermina Marcellin. And again, I would like to thank you, Evie, for joining us on Caribbean Focus.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very fortunate for this opportunity to come and share my story.
You are most welcome. You are originally from the Bahamas and a descendant of Haitian immigrant parents. May you share with us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I was born in the Bahamas, Freeport, Grand Bahama, Bahamas. I arrived here, almost 40 years ago in the United States. I've lived here most of my life, originally of Haitian parents. Both of my parents are of Haitian descent. Most of my family, of course. And, my father was a tailor, my mother was a seamstress in the Bahamas. And when I migrated here, I migrated by myself to live with one of my elder sisters. And I have a very wonderful story of, just overcoming true migration story that most Latinx and community descendants can also share in, because I was an undocumented immigrant that, actually had to go through channels in order to become a citizen in the United States. So one day I'll come back to share that story with you. It's too long to share.
And you are and were a former site director of a campus elementary after school program and have previously held three positions with NYC Department of Education as a school-based parent coordinator, district family advocate, and family leadership coordinator. How did these positions prepare you for your current role as a community organizer?
I would say, you know, becoming a self advocate was preparation for all of these jobs. Being involved as a family leadership coordinator in the schools. I started out as a parent coordinator, but before that, I was a PTA president. I immersed myself in the education of my son. And, through everything that I learned, I had to learn about community involvement, even as a PTA representative. I had to get to know my community, understand, become more civically engaged, become more aware of certain school policies. So I would say that in learning how to advocate for myself, I learned how to advocate for others and be better able to understand how community work. And through understanding how community work, it enabled me to understand the role as a community organizer.
And speaking on the role as a community organizer, what are some of your responsibilities as a community organizer of housing equity?
As housing equity, our housing equity unit is one of five very grassroots oriented community engagement offices in the public advocate's office. And, our role in housing equity is really to assess the state of housing for all New Yorkers. We look at issues involving homelessness, temporary housing, in shelters. We look at tenants' rights. We look at issues with public housing, such as NYCHR, the conditions and issues of repairs in NYCHR. We look at some of the major concerns that are ongoing now regarding zoning, and really helping to educate, protect, and expand on what it is for, involving housing fairness, tenants' rights, housing affordability, safe housing, quality living spaces. All, for us, housing is a human right in New York City. So we do everything, including help to, I guess, engage some of the policy issues, engage the community around the policy issues that are actually being prepared for further expansion of housing rights for tenants across New York City. So housing, our unit deal with everything related to housing.
According to the 2020 US Census Bureau, in 2019, before the coronavirus pandemic hit, and again, highlighting that that was even before, an estimated 34 million individuals were living in poverty in the United States. What disparities do you think is the cause of this?
That was a big question. That's a big question. I would say that uh, we have to look at the fact that the historical disparities that really affected Black and Brown communities. Blacks in America were behind the eight ball even before the pandemic. Um, for Blacks in America, we're looking at issues of discrimination. We're essentially looking at systemic racism. We're looking at issues that affected their jobs, homes, job security, health. The disparities are numerous, you know, and there's was, the intersectionality of all of it kind of brought us into a state of of emergency. And what this pandemic has done is that it exposed everything. It exposed every nick and cranny of what poverty looks like in the Black community, especially when you think of the fact that health wise, because homelessness is something that deeply impacts Black people in America. So right now we're looking at issues with housing that is it's probably going to impact us even more so if we don't get to certain programs in place in order to protect ourselves going forward. So I would say definitely, um, you know, these disparities that we're talking about is far too numerous to really discuss in such a short time. But understand that there's a saying that when America has a cold, Black people have pneumonia. And we're looking at that right now. And we have to take every effort to really alleviate it.
Thank you so much for even attempting to at least touch on the surface of an in-depth conversation as it relates to poverty and housing, not only in New York, but even beyond, and especially immigrants in New York City, and that too would be part of the conversation because I am certain that there is another conversation, and in that intersectionality that you mentioned, there are disparities within disparities within disparities.
Exactly. Especially when you focus on how it impacts the Caribbean, how it impacts us as immigrants, migrating here, setting up shop. Many of us as immigrants are new business owners. So it's impacting those who are entrepreneurs, you know. Um, but primarily, we have to also look at the issues of systemic racism. When we think of all of the social justice movements that took place last year, going into this year, we're looking at right now a cry from people of color saying that we need help. We need reparations for all of the, all of the systemic backwards policies that have actually kept us behind the eight ball for so long. So now is the time for America to start to look at it. And I'm glad that the new administration has actually the bills for racial equity that they just signed, that the President Biden just signed, is a step in the right direction. You know, all of those systems that are disproportionately impacting people of color have to be examined point by point in order for us to be able to move forward. And it's, of course, pre-COVID, it was a problem, pre-COVID, but now we really need systems in place. We need supports in place in order for us to not only get back to where we were, which was not a good place, but we need to get beyond that as well. Yeah.
And you are well equipped to speak on this conversation. You're an experienced AmeriCorps Vista, which stands for Volunteer in Service to America tenant organization, who served on the National Affordable Housing Preservation Project. May you share with our listening audience a little bit more about this incentive?
The Housing Preservation Project was an incentive to preserve some of the contracts that were coming, excuse me, that were coming to term. These were, if you can go back in history in New York City, before 1970s, when there was a blight and there were buildings that were being sold for $1 by the
Hmm.
federal government,
Where
right?
was
Remember? If you recall those stories, those landlords entered into contractual agreements with the federal government to preserve those houses, those project-based Section 8 buildings, where tenants were paying at least only 30% of their income, and the rest of their rent would be subsidized by the federal government, which we call Section 8. But this was the entire building. So we wanted, many of these buildings are now have grown the neighborhoods, the tenants who are in these buildings, mostly Black and brown. They have lived in communities that are now becoming highly gentrified, such as communities in the Upper West Side. My area of work involved working with those Section 8 project-based buildings in Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen was originally where, you know, the maids and the butlers and the doorman for all of the Park Avenue, the people who lived on Park Avenue. That's where they came from. The maids and and all of the porters that took care of the hotels that were in Park Avenue. They grew the community. They actually went into those houses, those preserved houses. Usually Hell's Kitchen, at the time had a high crime area. The people who were the indigenous neighbors that actually built it up. The reason why I love that role, as my role as a Vista, and let me just tell you, as a Vista, we have to pledge 1 year commitment to work as a volunteer in service to America. And I worked on this affordability project because I thought that those people, many of them who are elderly seniors, Black and brown seniors, who have lived in their community for, like, some people 50 years or more, and they deserve to be in their spaces. They deserve to be able to age in place in their homes and the communities that they built up. And that's why I wanted that job. And I'm proud to say that as part of a of the Housing Affordability Project, we were able to preserve 9 projects, and that's like over 996 units. So almost 1,000 families got a chance to stay in their homes and not be evicted or displaced through gentrification that's taking place in their communities right now.
You touched on the subject of the deserving. What is the demographic of people needing these services?
Most of them are seniors, most of them are disabled, people of color. Predominantly, I would say, but especially when we're talking about New York City, but across the board, nationally, most of the people who are living in project-based Section 8 housing are people of color. And I would say that these are also people who are indigenous to communities that are being highly gentrified. These are the people who are being displaced because, they created a community and now the come up looks good. So, it's being taken over instead of trying to develop ways or build programs that are, to preserve the indigenous people to certain neighborhoods, and maintain the integrity of the communities that were bought, that people sacrificed, blood, sweat, and tears in order to maintain and grow. These are the ones who are unfortunately being displaced through gentrification. So I would say that we have to start looking at programs in order to support the people who are there.
Your passion, your commitment is an intense one. Do you own your immigration experience? Does it play a role in your commitment?
Very much so. And I would say that, again, it's such a long story, but um, again, I was in this country for over 40 years. Work jobs, some of them, when they talk about taking care of the elderly, I was a home care, a home taking care of the elderly. I did everything, secretarial work. I worked in McDonald's. I worked, where I took care of children. Every single job I could remember, I I was involved in ever since I graduated from high school. And I graduated from high school at 15 years old. But because I was undocumented, I couldn't go straight to college. I had to go straight to work. So on my documents, I even had to lie that I was older in order to take a job, to take care of 2 children, for a Jewish family, as I recall. So I would say that I've been working for a long time. I've planted very deep roots in this country, in this US of A, which is why I had such a huge problem with 45, because a lot of times we are looking at, being a Black person, a person of color, and I know many, Latinx, we share the same story. Lot of West Indian people, we share the same story. We have the same background. But if you have come into this country, just like those of old, just like the French, just like the English, just like the Irish, just like the Italians, we have planted roots here. This is our home. And the rights and privileges that come with it also belongs to us. So we have to take ownership of it. Yes, we have to always look out for those back home, definitely. But this is a place where we immigrated to, and we are a part of it now. We have changed the structure. We have changed the mosaic of this entire country, and now we have made it our own, and we have to take full ownership of it. I'm glad to see that we are more civically engaged. We are more involved in government. Many, including my boss, Jamani Williams, is of West Indian descent. Many of us are a part of this. And, And I would say anywhere we plant our feet, if you work and um, you, you have spilled blood, sweat, and tears, it's your home. And I think that that's how we need to look at it. So I'm very passionate about my role. I will always be this way. So there you have it. That's where it comes from.
And I am in remembrance of a post in commemorating the Harlem born icon, Cicely Tyson. And it read, "The power and influence of Black immigrants in creating American history is often overlooked." And her parents were from St. Kitts Nevis.
Yeah.
So that really speaks to the conversation that you're having now on the impact of immigrants in New York City, America on the whole.
On a whole, exactly. And it's when you look at someone like Cicely Tyson, her story is beautiful. It's beyond repair. I mean, it's there's nothing that can compare to it. And it's a story that needs to be told over and over again. When they say that representation matters, that's one of those stories that needs to be told in order for us to be able to grow from, because some of us are having those same conversations with our families right now as immigrants. The little Black girl who wants to be an actor, she's having that same conversation with her mom right now who wants her to be a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer, because there are so many of those type of mindsets that are still growing out of our community. And when we're changing minds, we're growing, and it's beautiful. It's
And the discussion is a very long and intense one, going back to this idea of intersectionality. And even with your background, with your Haitian background and Bahamas, that just really was intriguing to me. And I wish we had an hour to, further delve into, but just briefly speak on that magnitude of the integration, of Haitians into the Bahamas.
there's a story that needs to be told about um, the Bahamians themselves, because they have a beautiful history, as well as the Haitians, and that migration story that happened between the Bahamians and the Haitians. It's a story that involves a lot of internalized racism. um, the Bahamians were a subject of the British government, and of course, the Haitians were subjects of the French. The Haitians obtained their independence first, and of course, with that came a lot of Haitians don't like to hear that the Haitians were invited to come to the Bahamas at first. The first group that went to the Bahamas were the very affluent, educated Haitians. And I would tell you that when you look at there was a colorist part of it as well, because the most of the affluent, the well-educated Haitians of old, back in the 1950s, early 60s, were usually people who were, lighter complected. So there's a story behind that. When they first arrived, they weren't so nice to the Bahamians. So the Bahamians, there was a revolution between people of color. When they received their independence in the 1970s, the Haitians who helped to build up the Bahamas, those who came there as tailors, which my father was one, as seamstress, who helped to open up factories, clothing factories, those who came to work in the sugarcane fields and helped to develop the sugarcane field. I had an uncle that ran a chicken farm in the Bahamas. These are people who had high paying jobs, ran schools and street, had industry. They were merchants in the Bahamas. But things fell apart because, nobody taught us to really interact with each other. And I think that some of that is still happening even up to today. When we saw what happened when the hurricane hit the Bahamas, and many of the Haitian peoples were, especially most of the time in the 1970s, most of the people who started coming into the Bahamas were the poor Haitians who were migrating from what they call the mountains, Mun, because when Papa Doc fell, all of the city opened up to the poorer Haitians who came from the mountains, came from the villages, came to live in the city. The city was overrun. There are stories and books that you could read. One day next time I'll come with a list of books where everybody wanted to live in the city and everybody had access because they had a revolution and they overthrew the Tonton Macoutes who were no longer there to threaten them to get off the streets. So they came into the cities and they started migrating to the Bahamas. These were less educated Haitians who were taking menial jobs. And when the hurricane hit the Bahamas, those are the ones that we saw. So a lot of Haitian people will say, oh, the Bahamians didn't treat the Haitians very well, but they don't know about the previous history. So there's a big story behind that. And I would say that it's also telling us how to, it's a story that's I guess a teachable story because it tells us how to treat each other from island to island, because right now there was a time because of the migration of the 1970s, the original boat people, the image that was actually put on the press of Haitian people, you would think that every Haitian person that came here came in a boat. Or every Black person that migrated here came on a boat, the banana boat people, they call it. No,
And that is an attempt of generalization which could be so faulty. But you are engaged in creating your own story and writing your own story in a sense of your involvement and continuing to be passionate in helping those who are in need. How would people get information, especially regarding housing related issues, food insecurity solutions throughout New York City?
For New York City right now, I would say that there are some support systems that are set up. I would say that for those, even if you're an immigrant, because you can actually call 311. There's a tenant hotline. You can get free help over the phone from a public engagement unit that is set up with multiple languages. Even if you don't speak the language, you will able to get assistance. So I would say call 311. Also, as a part of 311, there is help, rental assistance for those who need help with housing. There is assistance for food insecurities, even though I'm involved personally in efforts to help alleviate some of the food insecurities, especially because our communities of immigrant and undocumented immigrants in New York City right now are facing, I guess, the highest. They're under threat. They're being left out of all of the government programs. They're the ones that don't really get, they're not getting the stimulus checks. They're not getting any of the benefits that these government programs have. So I would definitely say that get to the churches because the churches do offer help. And I'm talking directly to those who are undocumented, even immigrants. If you are food insecure, there are programs, and a lot of our churches are aligned with City Harvest. They're aligned with Get Food New York. They should have a program or a pantry in place, especially right now, in order to get food. And if anybody needs help, I would say, there is a food every Saturday between 12 and 3 at Life of Hope. It's located at 1377 on Flatbush, 1377 Brooklyn Avenue. So, and I could have the telephone number that you can call, or you could definitely give me a call directly at 929-301-0620. Please, and I could also put a flyer so that, check out the flyer, go to Life of Hope, that's LOH.org. Life of Hope, LOH.org, in order to get more information on where you can get some food. There's also programs for community fridges in our neighborhoods. We do have one on Nostrand and Rogers that you can get non-perishable foods. That's right there. There's a fridge right there. You look, you'll find it. It's very exposed, where there are certain unions that came together to form a community fridge so people could actually bring food, replenish the food on a regular basis, and anybody can go and pick up the food if you need it. So
And that is right on Nostrand
no
and,
Rogers.
and Rogers. Ivie, I would like to thank you once again for joining me today on Caribbean Focus. Continue to be an advocate in helping those in need.
Thank
And I would definitely welcome you back to Caribbean Focus so we could have that extended conversation.
you. Definitely. I look forward to that. And thank you for the work that you're doing, highlighting some of this information in our community. I just wanted to also say that, all of the information that today is really timely. So please take advantage. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my voice and to come in and provide this information. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. This has been Caribbean Focus. I am your host, Hermina Marcellin. Thanks for listening and watching. See you soon.